Oscar Thornton stood in his backyard, surveying the carpet of red and gold leaves that covered his lawn. The crisp October air nipped at his cheeks, carrying the scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. He'd always loved autumn, but lately, the season's beauty had been overshadowed by a growing sense of unease. As he began to rake, Oscar's mind wandered to the strange dreams that had been plaguing him for weeks. Vague, unsettling visions of ancestors he'd never met, their faces always obscured, their voices muffled yet urgent. He shook his head, trying to focus on the task at hand. The rhythmic scrape of the rake against the ground was almost meditative. But then a different sound broke through, a dull thunk as metal hit something solid beneath the leaves. Frowning, Oscar tried again. Another thunk. Curiosity piqued. He knelt down, pushing aside the damp leaves with his hands. His fingers brushed against something smooth and hard. A box, he realized, as he dug it out of the earth. It was small, wooden, and weathered by time. "What in the world?" Oscar murmured, turning the box over in his hands. It was locked, but the mechanism looked old and fragile. Inside the house, Oscar cleaned the dirt from the box, his excitement growing. He'd always been fascinated by history, especially that of his own family. Could this box contain some long-lost heirloom? After several failed attempts to open it gently, Oscar remembered the lock-picking videos he'd watched out of boredom one rainy weekend. It took some trial and error, but eventually, the lock gave way with a satisfying click. Oscar's breath caught as he lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, were several sepia-toned daguerreotypes. He carefully lifted one out, holding it up to the light. The image showed a stern-faced man in Victorian-era clothing. Oscar recognized him from old family albums. His great-great-grandfather, Nathaniel Thornton. But something was wrong. Where Nathaniel's right ear should have been, there was only a smooth, scarred patch of skin. Confused, Oscar examined the other photos. Each one depicted a different ancestor, and every single one was missing their right ear. But it was the message scrawled at the bottom of each image that sent a chill down his spine. Silence it. Over the next few days, Oscar became obsessed with the photographs. He took time off work, spending hours at the local historical society, comparing the mutilated images with normal family photos. His ancestors had done this to themselves, but why? As his research deepened, Oscar began to notice strange things. Walking down the street, he'd catch snippets of conversation that seemed too private, too intimate to be spoken aloud. In the grocery store, he found himself overwhelmed by a cacophony of whispers and murmurs that no one else seemed to hear. One afternoon, Oscar met his friend Lucas for lunch at their favorite diner. As Lucas chatted about work stress, Oscar found himself growing increasingly agitated. The clinking of cutlery, the hum of conversation, even the soft whir of the ceiling fan, everything seemed amplified, intrusive. On an impulse, Oscar covered his left ear. Instantly, Lucas's voice transformed into a horrifying mixture of growls and shrieks. Oscar jerked his hand away, his heart pounding. "You okay, man?" Lucas asked, concern etching his features. Oscar forced a smile. "Yeah, just a headache. Go on, you were saying?" But as Lucas continued, Oscar's mind raced. What was happening to him? Over the next week, Oscar's condition worsened. He could hear people's pain, their secrets, their darkest thoughts, but only the negative ones. Every sound became an assault of misery and anguish. He barely slept, barely ate, tormented by the constant barrage of others' suffering. Desperate for answers, Oscar returned to the daguerreotypes. As he held them, his fingers brushed against an old pocket watch, a family heirloom passed down from his grandfather. Suddenly, a soft voice spoke in his mind. "Oscar," it said, "I am Amelia Thornton, your great-great-grandmother." Startled, Oscar nearly dropped the watch. "What's happening to me?" he whispered. "You're experiencing our family's curse," Amelia's voice replied. "I buried those photos, knowing that someday one of my descendants would need to understand. Let me show you." In a dizzying instant, Oscar found himself transported to the past. He was chained in a dank cellar, the sounds of war raging above. Fear and desperation clawed at him as an ancient, powerful voice offered a Faustian bargain. "I can make your family powerful, prosperous," Victoria said. "All I ask in return is a small price, the ability to hear the struggles of others through your right ear, to bear witness to the world's pain and secrets." Oscar watched as his ancestor, driven by desperation, accepted the deal. curse was born, passed down through the generations, growing stronger with each passing year. Back in the present, Oscar staggered, his mind reeling from the vision. The terrible choice faced by his ancestors now lay before him. The curse ran in his blood, an inescapable legacy of pain. For days, Oscar grappled with his decision. The constant onslaught of misery was unbearable, driving him to the brink of madness. Yet the alternative seemed unthinkable. In the end, it was a moment of pure anguish that decided him. Walking past a park, he was overwhelmed by the collective pain and sorrow of everyone around him. A grieving widow, a child being bullied, a man contemplating suicide. It was too much to bear. With shaking hands, Oscar picked up a woodworking chisel. He stood before the bathroom mirror, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though to whom he wasn't sure. The pain was intense but brief. As blood trickled down the side of his head, Oscar looked at his reflection. The right side of his head was a mess of gore, but his left ear, his normal human ear, remained intact. And then, blessed silence. The torrent of others' misery was gone, leaving only the soft sound of his own breathing. As he bandaged his wound, Oscar found himself smiling despite the pain. Like his ancestors before him, he had found peace, but at a terrible cost. The curse was silenced, but not broken. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Oscar knew that someday, another Thornton would unearth those haunting photos and face the same impossible choice.